Now to discuss this issue with us further is Martin Summers from the UK. Martin, we heard just there Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, made a speech, and also she was very pessimistic about a peace deal being made. Do you think that both sides in this conflict in Ukraine, do they want peace or do they want to continue the war?
Well, I think the government in Kiev is quite militaristic and would like to continue the war. The ordinary population, I think, less so. But I think that at the geopolitical level now, there are clearly some serious questions being raised about what the end of this conflict is going to be. And up to now, of course, we haven't had such a high-level delegation going to Moscow. There's the talk, of course, of supplying more weaponry to the regime in Kiev. I think they've already been supplying weaponry. The pretense that hasn't been going on is part of the problem, I think.
Well, I mean, let's look what's happening on the ground at the moment. The rebels, the separatists, the pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine at the moment are gaining more ground. So do you think this is one of the main reasons why we're seeing, on the one hand, Europe is talking about peace, and on the other hand, US is talking about more arms to the Ukrainian forces?
Well, I think to some extent the Western powers are trapped by their own rhetoric here. They've presented a rather exaggerated and one-sided vision of what's been going on, and then they've presented it as some kind of moral crusade, when it's a much more murky situation than that, with more complex aspects to it. And of course, you've got elements within the state apparatus in the US who are very keen to escalate the war, and others who are less so. And so we're now seeing a kind of split emerging within the Western ranks, and potentially a split between the European Union and the US about how to proceed. And of course, the British position isn't very clear. A former British general today was saying that David Cameron is absent from this diplomatic mission. That just shows how irrelevant he is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, do you think that the US will go ahead and arm the Ukrainian forces? Do you think that will be something on the horizon?
Well, I think that when you've talked yourself into that sort of situation, it's difficult to say, oh no, we're not going to do it now. But I would hope that wiser counsels would prevail, and the spokesperson for the White House there did seem to suggest that they were in two minds about it. I don't think John McCain's in two minds about it. I think that Berlin and Paris are extremely worried about further escalation of the conflict, not least because of the knock-on effects on the Eurozone.
But and also the implications...
You can now see that the Greek government is opening diplomatic discussions with the Russians. So all of these things are becoming interweaved.
I mean, but the implications, if that does go ahead, and if the US does supply arms, openly to the Ukrainian forces, do you think Russia will directly start supplying arms to the separatists?
Well, I think General Breedlove, who's the head of NATO in Europe, was saying exactly that. That, I mean, the problem with us supplying further weapons to Kiev is that then that gives a green light to the Russians to supply further weapons to their protégés. And I think that that's potentially possible. But on the other hand, I mean, the Ukrainian forces have been pretty comprehensively militarily outgunned by their rebel opponents. They haven't got the motivation to fight. Most of the civilians who've been killed have been killed in eastern Ukraine, and therefore, the friends and relatives of those who are fighting for a separate state. And they're much better motivated and led. And that has actually made a substantial difference on the ground. I mean, the pocket where the ceasefire has just been called today is completely surrounded by rebel forces, and there are up to 5,000 Ukrainian troops in there who are facing, surrender or death. And that's the reality. And that should cause people in the Western of a warlike disposition to think twice about this. It's all very well talking about wars, but then you've also got to have a plan to win them. There doesn't seem to be one. And surely everybody is saying, out of one side of their mouths, that there is no military solution to this. And of course there isn't.
Well, I mean, this tug of war is likely to continue. And I don't think, in your opinion, do you think America will allow Ukraine, the eastern part of Ukraine to be under the hands of the separatists? Do you think that they could escalate to a new Cold War?
Well, we've already escalated it to a hot war. The people that are dying as we speak already think that it is a hot war. I think the possibility exists that both sides will recognise the futility of further conflict. But don't forget, there are forces in the US in particular who are keen to bog Russia down in Ukraine so that their hands are free to do things in places like Syria. So they don't just see this as being about the Ukraine. They think they've created a sort of problem for Putin on his doorstep, and that keeps him busy so that they can do things elsewhere. And it's sad for the people of Ukraine, whatever side they're on, that they're being used as pawns in this bigger battle.
Martin Summers, political expert there, thank you very much for joining us today.